I used to stay too long after basketball practice just to avoid going home. Not because anything was wrong there. Nothing dramatic, anyway. My apartment was fine. Quiet. Cheap enough. One bedroom above a pharmacy where the pipes knocked every night around 2 in the morning like somebody politely trying not to wake me. Still, I'd sit around after everyone left. Bounce a ball with no real rhythm. Check my phone. Lock it again. There were 3 unfinished text messages in my drafts most nights. One to my ex. One to my mother. One that just said, "You awake," with no name attached to it. I never sent any of them. That's around the time I started going to Dylan's house more often. At first it was normal. We'd play video games downstairs, eat microwave burritos, complain about work. Typical stuff. Dylan had this way of making every sentence sound like he'd already halfway stopped caring about it. But his mother noticed things. That was the problem. The first time I really paid attention to her, she was standing in the kitchen rinsing out a coffee thermos at the sink. Nothing cinematic about it. Gray sweatshirt. Reading glasses slipping down her nose. Rain tapping softly against the windows over the sink. She looked over her shoulder and said, "You're the quiet friend." I remember laughing a little. That a bad thing? No, she said. Just means you think before speaking. Usually. Something about the way she said it made me stay in the doorway a second longer than necessary. Her name was Laura. 46, I think. Maybe 47. Dylan once joked that she'd stopped counting after 40 because the government didn't deserve the information. She had this dry kind of humor that almost disappeared if you weren't listening carefully. After that, I started noticing small things. She remembered how I took coffee after hearing it once. Not black, not sweet either. Just enough cream to change the color. "You still drink it like old bookstore employees?" she asked one night, handing me a mug. I stared at it. "How do you even remember that?" She shrugged. "You always look disappointed before the first sip." That got me. Not because it was flirtatious. It wasn't. It was worse. It was observant. And lonely people are dangerous around anyone who pays attention to them. Some evenings Dylan would disappear upstairs to take calls, leaving me alone at the kitchen table while Laura folded laundry nearby. Socks. Dish towels. One of Dylan's old band shirts. The television murmured faintly from another room. I'd sit there peeling the paper label off a water bottle while she talked about ordinary things. A rude customer at the dental office where she worked. Her neighbor's awful wind chimes. The fact that grocery stores somehow played sad music after 9 p.m. "You ever notice that?" she asked. "What?" "The songs. They make buying bread feel emotionally complicated." I laughed harder than the joke deserved. She smiled without looking up from the towels. That part stayed with me longer than it should have. There were moments I caught myself watching her hands while she spoke. The silver ring she twisted absent-mindedly when she was thinking. The way she pressed her lips together before saying something honest. And every single time, guilt arrived right behind it. Because she was Dylan's mother. Because she was old enough to know better. Because I was young enough not to. One night, while Dylan showered upstairs before we headed out, Laura stood near the front door holding my hoodie between her fingers. "You forgot this last week," she said. "Oh." I took it from her too quickly. "Thanks." Our hands touched for maybe half a second. Nothing happened, which somehow made it harder to stop thinking about. Then she glanced toward the stairs to make sure Dylan wasn't coming down yet. And quietly, almost casually, said, "You don't have to wait in parking lots before coming inside, you know." I froze. "What?" "You always sit in your car for a few minutes first." She folded her arms gently. "I just thought maybe nobody tells you you're welcome anywhere." I didn't know what to say to that. So I looked down at the hoodie strings in my hands and nodded once like an idiot. Later that night, around midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a second, I honestly thought it might be a scam call. But then the message came through. "Dylan forgot his lunch on the counter again. Thought you'd enjoy knowing he'd never survive alone." Laura, I stared at the screen for a very long time before answering. After that first text, something shifted. Not dramatically. Nobody crossed a line. Nobody confessed anything. We mostly sent each other stupid observations late at night. Pictures of badly parked cars. Comments about terrible grocery store music. Once, around 11, she texted, "Dylan just tried to cook chicken in the toaster oven." Thought you should know I raised a raccoon. I laughed out loud alone in my apartment, then stared at the typing bubble longer than I should have. I started coming over even when Dylan wasn't home yet. That should have been my first warning sign. Traffic? Laura asked one evening when I showed up early. Something like that. She gave me a look over the rim of her tea mug like she knew I was lying, but didn't plan to embarrass me about it. Rain pressed softly against the windows again. That house always seemed quieter during storms. Warmer too. She was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through unopened mail, reading glasses low on her nose. I stood awkwardly near the counter pretending to help by opening a package of batteries she'd been struggling with. You ever notice, she said, everything becomes impossible to open after 40. You're acting like 40 is 80. Depends on the morning. I smiled. Then silence settled between us, not uncomfortable exactly. Just aware. I realized I'd started recognizing the sounds of her routine. The kettle clicking off. Her soft cough after the first sip of tea. The way she tapped envelopes against the table before opening them. Loneliness makes you memorize people. That thought bothered me more than it should have. You okay? She asked suddenly. I looked up too fast. Yeah. Why? You disappear sometimes. She folded another envelope neatly. Right in front of me. I shrugged like it was nothing. Truth was, I'd been thinking about how dangerous this felt lately. Not physically. Quiet things rarely are. But emotionally. Yeah. Because she was my friend's mother. Because sometimes I caught myself imagining what it'd feel like to touch the inside of her wrist while she reached for a coffee mug. Because every time my phone lit up with her name, my entire mood changed before I even read the message. I kept trying to make it smaller in my head than it was. Just attention. Just comfort. Just someone older being kind to a lonely guy who didn't know what to do with himself yet. Still, I started noticing signs of her loneliness too. The untouched side of the bed visible from the hallway when the bedroom door stayed open. The way she let television reruns play without watching them. The fact she made too much tea every night like she kept expecting someone else to walk into the kitchen. You were married a long time. I asked carefully. The question slipped out before I could stop it. She paused. Not offended. Just surprised. 20 years, she said finally. I nodded once. And then, Laura rubbed her thumb slowly against the edge of the mug. And then one day, she said, I realized I was lonelier sitting next to him than sitting by myself. The kitchen went very still after that. I didn't know where to look. So I focused on folding and unfolding the paper battery packaging in my hands until it bent soft at the corners. That sounds horrible, I said quietly. She shrugged a little. It sounds dramatic when you say it out loud. A small smile. Most sad things do. Dylan came home 20 minutes later, loud and distracted, and dropping his backpack by the stairs. The spell broke immediately, but not completely. Later, while I was leaving, Laura followed me to the front porch because the rain had gotten heavier. You'll hydroplane driving in this, she said. I'll survive. She folded her arms against the cold. You don't always sound convinced about that. I laughed softly through my nose. Then she reached forward absent-mindedly and brushed something from the shoulder of my hoodie. Just lint probably. Nothing. But her fingers stayed there half a second too long. And I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. Things got strange after Dylan noticed I'd started showing up even when he wasn't there yet. Not suspicious exactly. Just observant in the careless way friends sometimes are. You and my mom text more than we do now, he joked one afternoon. I still fixed on his game controller. He laughed after saying it. I did too. Too quickly. Laura was at the sink rinsing strawberries. I saw her shoulders tense for half a second before she reached for a towel. Maybe because I answer people, she said dryly. Dylan groaned. Wow. Okay. Cool. Everybody attack me tonight. The conversation moved on, but something stayed unsettled after that. I started second-guessing everything. How long I looked at her. How fast I answered her texts. Whether anybody else would notice the way the room changed when she walked into it. So I pulled back a little. Took longer replying. Stopped coming over on weekdays. Told myself it was the smart thing to do. And maybe it was. Problem was, loneliness gets louder once you've interrupted it for a while. My apartment felt smaller again. I started eating dinner standing over the sink. Let dishes pile up. Fell asleep with the television on just to hear another voice in the room. Then Thursday came. Dylan was out with coworkers, but Laura texted asking if I could help move a bookshelf upstairs because apparently adulthood means your back expires. I stared at the message for a long time before answering. I knew I shouldn't go. Still grabbed my keys anyway. The house smelled faintly like cinnamon tea when I walked in. Laura was barefoot, wearing soft gray sweatpants and one of those oversized cardigans people only wear at home when nobody's supposed to see them. For one stupid second, the intimacy of that hit me harder than anything else had. "You came," she said, then immediately looked embarrassed by how that sounded. "I mean, the shelf." "Right," I said quietly. "The very dangerous shelf situation." She laughed through her nose and stepped aside to let me in. Upstairs, the bookshelf was lighter than expected. We barely struggled with it. Still, afterward neither of us moved away immediately. The hallway felt narrow, warm. I became very aware of how close she was standing. "You disappeared a little," she said softly. I looked down at the shelf brackets in my hands. Thought maybe I should. Not agreement. Not disagreement either. Just that sound she made when she was thinking something all the way through. "You ever do that?" I asked. "Pull away before something gets complicated." Laura leaned against the wall lightly, arms folded. "All the time." Her voice sounded tired suddenly. There was a long silence after that. Not empty. Heavy. I noticed little things because I didn't know where else to put my attention. The loose strand of hair near her collarbone. The faint crease in her sleeve where she'd pushed it up absent-mindedly. Her fingers rubbing slowly against her own wrist. Then she looked at me. Really looked at me. And something in my chest shifted hard enough to hurt. "You're a good kid," she said quietly. Kid. The word landed badly. I laughed once, but there wasn't much humor in it. "You always say things right before ruining my entire week." Her expression changed immediately. Small. Surprised. Maybe because that was the closest either of us had come to admitting there was something happening here. The air felt strange after that. Too still. Laura opened her mouth, like she might say something else. Then footsteps sounded outside. Dylan's voice downstairs. Loud. Distracted. Looking for his charger. Both of us moved apart too fast. The moment snapped so sharply it almost felt embarrassing. Laura cleared her throat and fixed the sleeve of her cardigan. "You should probably head down before he thinks I made you assemble furniture for 6 hours." "Yeah," I said. But neither of us moved right away. And for one reckless second, just one, I thought if nobody had come home yet, she might have kissed me first. After the hallway thing, Laura started keeping a little more distance. Not cold, just careful. Texts got shorter, more spaced out. She stopped lingering in doorways when I came over. If Dylan left the room, she suddenly found reasons to leave too. At first I told myself that was good. Necessary, probably. Then one Friday night, I stopped by unexpectedly and found her sitting on the back porch with another man. Nothing dramatic. Just some guy from her office, I think. Mid-50s maybe. Nice jacket. Calm voice. He was making her laugh. That bothered me more than it had any right to. I stood in the kitchen pretending to look for Dylan while hearing pieces of their conversation drift through the screen door. "You still working too much, Laura. Occupational hazard. You always say that." Then her laugh again. Soft. Comfortable. Like history lived inside it. I hated the feeling immediately. Not anger exactly. Something smaller. Worse. The realization that I had quietly started believing some part of her belonged to me. Dylan came downstairs grabbing his keys. "Oh good, you're here. Mom's friend Eric stopped by. We're heading out in 10. Friend. Right. The whole night felt off after that. I barely spoke during dinner. Kept checking my phone without reading anything. Laura noticed, I think. She always noticed. When Eric finally left, she walked him to the driveway, while Dylan showered upstairs before going out again. I should have gone home too. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen rinsing a perfectly clean glass for no reason at all. When Laura came back inside, she paused after seeing me still there. "You okay?" "Fine. That sound again." I set the glass down harder than I meant to. "He seems nice." There it was. Jealousy sounds embarrassing once it leaves your mouth. Laura looked genuinely confused for a second. "Eric." "Yeah." He's divorced. We work together. I nodded like that answered something. Then silence. The refrigerator hummed softly behind us. Rain tapped faintly against the windows again, because apparently the universe had decided our entire relationship would happen during bad weather. Laura leaned one hand against the counter. You're upset. I'm not upset. You're rinsing the same glass for the 9th time. That almost made me smile. Almost. I looked down instead. My voice caught slightly. I don't know what we're doing. The words sat between us immediately. Too honest to take back. Laura went very still. Neither of us moved. Upstairs, pipes shifted softly in the walls. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed shut. Tiny, ordinary sounds while my entire chest felt like it was coming apart quietly. You think I don't ask myself that? She said at last. Her voice was low now. Tired. I looked at her. Really looked. And suddenly, she didn't seem older than me in that moment. Just lonely in a way I recognized too well. Laura rubbed her hands slowly together like she was cold. You come into this house, and everything gets louder afterward, she admitted softly. When you leave, I mean. I stopped breathing for a second. She realized what she'd said immediately. Her eyes flicked away, then back. This is exactly why I tried to create space. Didn't work. No. A small, sad laugh. Apparently not. I took one step closer before I could talk myself out of it. Not touching her. Just closer. Close enough to see the nervous movement in her throat when she swallowed. You called me a kid before, I said quietly. But you look at me like, I stopped. Because I didn't know if I wanted the answer. Or because I already knew it. Laura's eyes dropped briefly to my mouth before lifting again. That tiny movement nearly ruined me. Upstairs, Dylan's footsteps crossed the hallway. Neither of us moved. And hanging there between us, in the silence, in the waiting, in the awful honesty of it, was one unbearable question. If nobody interrupted us this time, would either of us stop? The weird part was how normal everything looked afterward. Nobody kissed anybody. Nobody got caught. Dylan still sent me stupid memes at 2 in the morning. Laura still made tea whenever people came over. The world kept moving like nothing had tilted slightly off-center. Except it had. And Laura knew it before I did. She stopped texting first. At first I barely noticed. Then I noticed too much. I'd reach for my phone during lunch breaks expecting her name. Nothing. 3 days passed. Then 5. I typed messages anyway. Everything okay. Deleted. Sorry if I made things weird. Deleted. One night around midnight. I almost sent. I think about you more than I should. That one sat in the text box a long time before I erased it too. The silence between us started feeling intentional. That's what hurt. Dylan mentioned casually that his dad had been around more lately. Think he's trying to get back together with mom or something. He said while searching for a charger under couch cushions. Weird, honestly. Something cold moved through me. I tried to sound normal. She wants that. He shrugged. Who knows with them? They were together forever. Forever. Funny word. People say it casually until it lands on your chest like furniture. I stopped going over after that. Not dramatically. I just kept finding reasons not to. Too tired. Early shift tomorrow. Maybe next week. The truth was simpler. I didn't know how to exist around her anymore without wanting something. And wanting something from Laura felt dangerous now. Not fantasy dangerous. Real life dangerous. Like the kind of thing that leaves permanent damage in ordinary places. A week later she finally texted. Just one message. Dylan said you vanished. I stared at it while sitting in my parked car outside a grocery store. Rain again. Always rain somehow. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I figured space was smarter. The typing bubble appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Then, you're probably right. That should have settled things. Instead it made my chest ache in this quiet, embarrassing way. After that, days blurred strangely. Work. Gym. Microwave dinners eaten standing up. I started noticing habits I'd picked up from her without meaning to. Letting tea steep too long. Listening to old music while cleaning. Tapping envelopes against counters before opening them. Little ghosts of somebody. Then Dylan invited me over for his birthday. I almost said no immediately. But I went. Of course I did. The house was crowded and loud in a way it normally wasn't. Music in the living room. Half-empty chip bowls everywhere. Somebody laughing too hard upstairs. Laura moved through the rooms, smiling politely, carrying plates, asking people if they needed drinks. She looked beautiful. That made me angry. Not at her. At myself. Because she barely looked at me all night. Not avoidance exactly. More careful than that. Like someone holding a glass they already cracked once. At one point, we ended up alone in the kitchen for maybe 30 seconds while everyone else drifted outside. Neither of us spoke. She dried her hands slowly with a dish towel. I leaned against the counter pretending my heartbeat wasn't ridiculous. Then she said quietly, without looking at me, "My ex has been staying here a few nights." The words hit harder because of how calm she sounded. "Oh, that's partly why she stopped. Started again. I needed things to settle down." I nodded once. Like I understood. Maybe I did. Still hurt. Laura finally looked at me then, and there was something exhausted in her expression. Not rejection exactly. More like grief arriving early before anybody had officially lost anything yet. "I'm trying very hard to be responsible," she said softly. I almost asked, "And are you happy?" But Dylan burst into the kitchen looking for candles before I could. The moment disappeared immediately. Later that night, I sat in my car outside my apartment staring at my phone again. Her contact open. A message typed out. Not sent. Upstairs, my windows were dark. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. A few nights after Dylan's birthday, Laura called me. Not texted. Called. I almost didn't answer because people only call when something's wrong. "Hey," I said carefully. For a second all I heard was breathing. Traffic somewhere near her. Then, "Can you come help me with something?" "That depends. Is it another bookshelf?" A small laugh. God, I'd missed that sound. "It's the kitchen sink," she said. I dropped something down the drain, and apparently adulthood continues humiliating me. I knew the excuse wasn't real. Still grabbed my keys before the call even ended. The house was quiet when I got there. No television. No music. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and rain ticking lightly against the windows again, like the weather had signed some emotional contract with us. Laura stood at the sink wearing jeans and a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up unevenly. "There you are," she said softly. The kitchen sink looked completely fine. I stared at it. Then at her. "You didn't drop anything, did you?" "No." "Okay." That was it. No dramatic reveal. No speech. Just two tired people standing in a kitchen, finally too exhausted to keep pretending they didn't understand what had been happening for months. Laura wrapped her arms around herself loosely. "My ex moved back out," she said after a while. I nodded once. "Dylan thinks we're trying again." A pause. Maybe part of me wanted to. "You don't have to explain." "I know." She looked down at the counter. "I think I need to anyway." Something in her voice made me stay quiet. Laura rubbed her thumb slowly against the edge of the sink. "When you get divorced in your 40s, everybody acts like the important part of your life already happened." She laughed faintly through her nose. "Like you should just become sensible after that." I looked at her hands while she spoke because eye contact suddenly felt too intense. "You ever notice," she continued quietly, "how lonely people try very hard not to inconvenience anyone?" The question hit too close. I leaned against the counter beside her. "Yeah," I said. "I notice." Silence again. Not empty this time. Just honest. Then Laura finally looked at me fully, and there was no careful distance left in her expression anymore. No pretending this was maternal or harmless or temporary. Just fear. Real fear. "You're younger than me," she said softly. "I know. You're Dylan's friend. I know. And if this becomes real, even a little." She stopped there. Swallowed once. Things could break. That word sat heavily between us. Break. Friendships. Trust. Whatever fragile balance we'd all been standing on. I should have backed away then. Maybe a smarter person would have. Instead, I said the thing I'd spent months swallowing. "I think things already changed the second you noticed me." Laura's face shifted immediately. Small. Hurt. Relieved. Like hearing the truth out loud cost something. I kept going before courage disappeared. I tried staying away. My voice sounded rough now. I really did. But everything feels quieter when you're not around, and I laughed once under my breath. I don't even know what to do with that. Neither of us moved. The kitchen light buzzed softly overhead. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the window before disappearing again. Then Laura stepped closer, slow enough that I could have stopped it, close enough that I could feel warmth coming off her sweater now. Her hand touched my wrist lightly. Not desperate, not dramatic, just careful. "You make me feel awake again," she admitted quietly. "And that scares me a little." I looked at her for a long time after that, then nodded once because I understood exactly what she meant. And after months of unfinished sentences, almost confessions, and silence stretched thin between us, Laura smiled sadly. I covered her hand gently with mine, and very softly, like we were agreeing to something fragile instead of romantic, I said, "Okay." Nothing changed quickly after that night in the kitchen. That's probably why it lasted. There was no dramatic confession to Dylan. No slammed doors. No movie scene chaos where somebody runs through rain making impossible speeches. Life stayed ordinary, which turned out to be harder. Laura and I became careful in a different way after that. Honest, finally, but careful. Some nights I still came over and sat at the kitchen table while she made tea. Dylan would ramble about work or dating apps or some conspiracy theory involving energy drinks, completely unaware of the tectonic plates shifting quietly 2 feet away from him. Other nights, Laura and I barely spoke at all, just exchanged looks that said too much. A hand lingering near mine while passing sugar. A tiny smile when I walked through the door. The kind of intimacy that grows slowly enough to disguise itself as routine. Months passed before anything became official. Even then, official felt like the wrong word. It happened one cold morning in February, 8:47 a.m. I remember because Laura laughed when she saw me checking the clock. "You always notice exact times during emotional moments?" she asked. "Only the traumatizing ones." She rolled her eyes softly and handed me coffee. Still the same way. Not black, not sweet either. Just enough cream to change the color. By then, Dylan had moved into an apartment across town with 2 roommates and a dying cactus he kept forgetting to water. Life had stretched naturally between all of us. Messy in places, tender in others. He found out eventually, not from some dramatic reveal. He came back unexpectedly one afternoon and saw Laura asleep against my shoulder on the couch while some terrible cooking show played in the background. I'll never forget the silence that followed. Laura waking up slowly. Me sitting there feeling 19 years old again. Dylan staring at both of us with this complicated expression I still can't fully name. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Nobody had a speech prepared. That was the worst part. The months after that were difficult in quiet ways. Dylan stopped answering texts for a while. Laura cried exactly twice, both times privately, because she hated crying in front of people. And me, I almost left more than once. Not because I stopped loving her. Because I did. Enough to understand what it was costing everybody. But real life kept happening in between the hard parts. Groceries. Burnt toast. Laundry left too long in the dryer. Laura reading beside me on the couch with her feet tucked under my leg like she'd been doing it forever. And slowly, the tension stopped feeling forbidden and started feeling lived in. Earned. One evening, almost a year later, I came home from work to find her standing at the sink again. Same kitchen, same rain against the windows. She was rinsing out that old coffee thermos while humming absent-mindedly to herself. For a second, the entire beginning of us came rushing back, so clearly it almost hurt. "You're staring," she said without turning around. "You noticed." I always notice. That line would have terrified me once. Now it just felt like home. I walked over quietly and rested my chin against her shoulder for a moment. She reached back automatically, fingers brushing against my wrist the same way they had the night everything finally became real. Small habits become love eventually. I think that's the part nobody tells you. Not fireworks. Not destiny. Just somebody remembering how you take your coffee. Somebody noticing when you disappear into yourself. Somebody making too much tea because they still expect you to walk through the door. Laura tilted her head slightly toward mine. "You know," she said softly, "you still wait in the car for a minute before coming inside sometimes." I laughed under my breath. "Yeah," I admitted. "Guess I'm still getting used to being welcome somewhere." She turned then, smiling that quiet, Devastating smile. I'd been losing arguments to for over a year now. And this time when she touched my face, neither of us hesitated. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?